Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a Supreme Court case that feels like it's straight out of a novel, literally. It's called Williams versus Reed, and it's all about a classic catch-22, a situation where the very rules that are supposed to help you, well, they end up being the exact thing that traps you. So let's break this down.
So, to really get this, let's start with a question. Just imagine this for a second. You're waiting for something you absolutely need, right? Let's say it's unemployment benefits. But the decision just gets delayed and delayed and delayed. So what do you do when the system that's supposed to fix your problem becomes the problem?
Well, that's not just a hypothetical. That exact scenario is what started this whole thing. We're talking about real people, unemployed workers in Alabama, who got caught in this incredibly frustrating bureaucratic loop, just waiting and waiting for help they desperately needed.
So eventually, a group of 21 of them decided to sue. Now here's what's so interesting about their lawsuit. They weren't asking a judge to say, hey, give us our benefits. No, their request was actually much simpler. They just wanted the court to order the state to do its job and process their claims in a timely way, just like the law says. They were basically just trying to get the gears of government moving again.
Okay, so take a look at this. This is the official process they had to go through. You've got all these steps. You apply, an examiner makes a decision, you can appeal to a tribunal, then appeal again to a board of appeals, but check out that last step. That's the kicker. The law says you can only sue in state court after you've gone through every single one of those other steps. No skipping ahead.
And right there, that is the catch-22. It's a perfect trap. How can you sue the state for taking too long if the law says you can't sue them until the process is, well, finished? You see the problem? You're stuck. You have to wait for the delayed process to end before you're legally allowed to complain that the process is delayed. It's just an impossible loop.
And look, you don't have to take my word for it. Justice Kavanaugh, who wrote the opinion for the court, he put it perfectly. He basically said that with a rule like Alabama's, you can never challenge these kinds of delays. Not that it's hard, that it's literally impossible.
So as you can probably tell, this whole thing quickly became about way more than just unemployment checks in Alabama. It turned into this major clash between a state rule and a really important federal right.
All right, so let's look at the state side of this. Their argument rests on this legal idea called administrative exhaustion. And the basic idea makes sense. It just means you have to try and solve the problem through all the normal agency channels before you run to a judge. But the key here is that Alabama's rule was super strict. It was mandatory, no exceptions.
Okay, but on the other side, the workers had a powerhouse federal law on their side. It's called 42 U.S.C. paragraph 1983. Now that's just a legal code, but what it is, it's a critical civil rights law. It basically gives you, as a citizen, the right to sue government officials in court if you think they're violating their federal rights. And this is where we see the two sides crash right into each other. You've got Alabama's rules saying, whoa, hold on, you have to finish our entire process first. But then you have this federal right that says, nope, if your rights are being violated, you can sue. So you've got a state law telling you to wait and a federal law giving you the green light to go to court. Something's got to give, right? So which one wins?
All right, so this whole conflict lands right in the lap of the Supreme Court, and they had to figure out how to solve this. What's interesting is that they didn't come out with some huge, sweeping decision. Instead, their ruling was really narrow and specific.
And here's the bottom line. In a super close 5-4 decision, the court sided with the unemployed workers. The majority said that no, a state court cannot throw out one of these 1983 lawsuits just because the person hasn't exhausted the process, especially when the whole reason they're suing is because the process is taking forever.
Now, the legal reasoning here is based on a really important principle called preemption. It basically comes down to this. When a state law and a federal law are in conflict, the federal law is supreme. It wins. So the court is saying that a state can't just create a procedural rule that effectively shields its own officials from being sued under federal civil rights law. It can't be a get-out-of-jail-free card.
And this is such a critical point. The court said, we don't care what you call this law. We care what it does. Its practical effect, its real-world result, was to give state officials immunity from these kinds of lawsuits. And I love the way the court phrased it. They called it an immunity statute cloaked in jurisdictional garb. In other words, it was a shield disguised as a simple rule.
But remember, this was a 5-4 decision, which means it was super close. And the 4 justices in the dissent, well, they had some pretty serious problems with this. They basically argued that the majority was messing with the fundamental balance of power between the federal government and individual states.
Justice Thomas wrote the dissenting opinion, and his argument boiled down to states' rights. He said that our system gives states what's called plenary authority, which is just a fancy way of saying they have full power to set the rules for their own court systems. So, in his view, Alabama should get to decide how and when these kinds of federal cases are heard in its own courts.
So, from the dissent's point of view, this Alabama rule wasn't some evil plan to block federal rights. Not at all. They just saw it as a neutral, boring procedural rule. A simple rule of judicial administration to keep things orderly. They argued it was nothing like other cases where states had passed laws that were clearly designed to get around federal law.
Okay, so after all that legal debate, the majority, the dissent, what's the bottom line here? What does this decision actually mean for all of us and for the states moving forward?
All right, let's wrap this up with the key takeaways. First and foremost, states can't use their own procedures to create a catch-22 that completely blocks you from making a federal civil rights claim. That's a big one. Second, it's the effect of a state law that matters, not just what it's called. This decision also really strengthens Section 1983 as a tool to hold state officials accountable. But, and this is super important to remember, the ruling is very narrow. It's specifically about lawsuits over delays in a process. And finally, that 5-4 split, it tells you everything you need to know about the ongoing debate in this country over state power versus federal rights. That argument is definitely not over.
So really, this whole case leaves us with this huge ongoing question, doesn't it? How do we strike that balance between a state's need to have orderly, efficient rules and a citizen's fundamental right to have their case heard without endless delays? Williams versus Reed drew a line in the sand on this one issue, but you can bet the fight over exactly where that line should be, well, that's going to continue for a long, long time.